The last human stronghold burned like a dying star against the obsidian void, its defensive shields flickering with each pounding from the Velthari siege fleet. Commander Kalen Voss pressed his palm against the viewport of the orbital station. Defiance, watching as another evacuation transport exploded in brilliant orange flames. 3 billion souls had once called this system home. Now barely 3,000 remained. The Velthari had come not as conquerors, but as exterminators. Their crystalline ships moved with predatory grace, each one a masterwork of biological engineering fused with quantum technology. They had swept through human space like a plague, leaving nothing but ash and silence in their wake. Earth was gone. Mars was gone. The outer colonies, the mining stations, the research outposts, all consumed by their insatiable hunger for what they called cleansing. "Sir, we've lost contact with Sector 7, reported Lieutenant Naya Corvin, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The young officer had aged years in the past months, her auburn hair now streaked with premature silver. "The Velthari are using some kind of neural disruptor. Our people, they're not dying quickly." Voss closed his eyes, feeling the weight of command crush down upon him like a collapsing star. He had been a diplomat once, back when humanity still believed in peaceful solutions. That man had died the day he watched the Velthari turn the children of New Geneva into writhing sculptures of agony before finally granting them death. "How long until the last transport is away?" he asked. 17 minutes, sir. But the Velthari are adapting to our defensive patterns. They're learning. They always learned. That was what made them so terrifying. The Velthari didn't just kill. They studied, analyzed, and perfected their methods with each engagement. They treated genocide like a science, refining their techniques until resistance became impossible. Through the viewport, Voss watched as a wing of human fighters engaged a Velthari destroyer. The pilots fought with desperate courage, their ships dancing between energy beams that could vaporize a city block. One by one they fell, each death a small nova of defiance against the inevitable. "Sir!" Corvin's voice cut through his thoughts. "We're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It's from the shelters." Voss turned, his heart sinking. The underground shelters housed the last million civilians who couldn't be evacuated. The sick, the elderly, the children too young to survive the journey to the outer rim. They had been meant to wait in silence until rescue arrived. But rescue would never come. "Put it through." The voice that filled the command center was that of Dr. Mira Thorne, the shelter coordinator. Her words were calm, but Voss could hear the sounds of screaming in the background. "Commander, they found us. The Velthari. They're not just killing us. They're doing something to us. Changing us. The children are—" Her voice broke into static, then silence. The bridge fell quiet, except for the hum of failing life support and the distant thunder of weapons fire. Voss stared at the tactical display, watching as red dots, enemy ships, closed in on their position, like a noose, tightening around humanity's throat. "Orders, sir?" Corvin whispered. Voss felt something cold and dark unfurling in his chest. It wasn't fear. Fear had been burned out of him long ago. It wasn't despair. Despair was a luxury he couldn't afford. It was something far more dangerous. It was rage, pure, crystalline rage that cut through his exhaustion like a blade. Rage at the Velthari for their cruelty. Rage at the universe for its indifference. Rage at himself for failing to protect what mattered most. But most of all, rage at the idea that humanity would die quietly in the dark. "Prepare the Prometheus Protocol," he said quietly. Corvin's face went pale. "Sir, that's an order, Lieutenant. The Prometheus Protocol had been humanity's most closely guarded secret, locked away in the deepest vaults of military intelligence." Developed during the height of the old Cold War, it represented the kind of weapon that even the most hardened generals had feared to contemplate. It wasn't just a bomb or a beam, it was the weaponization of human consciousness itself. Dr. Elias Caney had been the project's architect, a brilliant neuroscientist who had discovered that human emotions, particularly the intense ones born of trauma and rage, could be converted into a form of exotic energy. The process was horrific. It required the willing sacrifice of a human mind, the complete burning out of a consciousness to fuel something that existed beyond the laws of physics as most species understood them. The Velthari had made one crucial mistake in their campaign of extermination. They had studied human technology, human tactics, even human biology, but they had never truly understood human psychology. They couldn't comprehend the depths of fury that their cruelty had awakened. "The device is ready, sir," reported Chief Engineer Tor Ramsey, his cybernetic arm interfacing directly with the station's systems. Half his body had been replaced with machinery after a Velthari acid attack on Titan, but his humanity burned brighter than ever in his remaining eye. "But, sir, the power requirements I know," Voss replied. He had studied the files during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. The Prometheus device required a specific type of psychic energy, the kind only generated by a mind in the grip of absolute, uncontainable rage. The subject had to want to destroy their enemies more than they wanted to live. On the main screen, the tactical situation grew more desperate by the minute. The Velthari had broken through the outer defensive perimeter and were now closing on. The evacuation transports. Voss watched as one of the massive alien bioships extended tendrils of living metal toward a refugee vessel. The humans aboard that ship wouldn't die clean deaths. They would be absorbed, their consciousness preserved in agony for the Velthari's twisted experiments. "Sir, incoming transmission from Admiral Vex Hara," Corvin announced, her voice tight. With hatred, the holographic display shimmered, revealing the nightmare visage of the Velthari fleet commander. Vex Hara was a creature of living crystal and organic metal, her form constantly shifting between states of matter. What passed for her face was a collection of faceted surfaces that reflected light in patterns that hurt human eyes to look upon. "Commander." "Voss!" The alien's voice was like music played on instruments made of screaming children. "Your resistance has been educational. We have learned much about your species' capacity for suffering. Soon, we will learn more. You want to learn about humans?" Voss stepped closer to the pickup. "Let me teach you something." He gestured to Ramsey, who began initializing the Prometheus device. Deep in the station's core, machinery that should never have been built hummed to life. "We've watched you burn our worlds," Voss continued, his voice growing harder with each word. "We've seen what you do to our children. You think you understand us because you've cataloged our screams. But you've never seen us truly angry." Vex Hara's crystalline features shifted into what might have been amusement. "Anger is merely chemical reactions, Commander. We have mapped every neurotransmitter, every hormonal cascade. Your rage is no mystery to us. Then you haven't been paying attention." The Prometheus chamber sealed around Voss as he stepped inside. Through the reinforced transparasteel, he could see his crew, Corvin with tears streaming down her face, Ramsey with his jaw clenched in grim determination, the others standing at their posts with the dignity of those who knew they were witnessing history. The machine read his biometrics, his brainwaves, the electrical patterns of his fury. It found what it needed, a rage so pure and consuming that it transcended mere emotion and became something else entirely. The rage of every parent who had lost a child to the Velthari's experiments. The rage of every soldier who had watched their comrades die screaming. The rage of an entire species facing extinction. "Prometheus device at full power," Ramsey reported. "Sir, it's been an honor." The last thing Voss saw before the machine took him was Vexahara's expression changing, from amusement to confusion, then to something that might have been fear. The last thing he felt was his rage igniting like a newborn star. Space itself screamed. The Prometheus detonation didn't create light or sound or heat. It created something far more primal. It was pure human fury given form, a wave of psychic energy that propagated faster than light itself, carrying with it the accumulated rage of a dying species. The first Velthari ships to be touched by the wave simply stopped. Their organic components, their living metal hulls, their quantum processors, all of it froze as if time itself had been suspended. Then they began to burn, not with fire, but with something far more terrible. They burned with the memory of every human they had tortured, every child they had perverted, every dream they had murdered. Admiral Vexahara felt it coming. Her species-enhanced senses, evolved over millions of years to detect the subtlest changes in reality's fabric, screamed warnings, but nothing in their vast experience had prepared them for this. The wave wasn't attacking their technology or their biology. It was attacking their consciousness itself. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice losing its musical quality as panic crept in. Around her, the bridge crew of her flagship began to convulse, their crystalline forms flickering between states of matter. The wave struck her ship like a tsunami of pure hatred. Every Velthari aboard suddenly experienced something their species had never truly known, the feeling of being prey. They felt the terror of the humans they had hunted, the desperation of parents watching their children die, the hopeless rage of a species facing extinction. But more than that, they felt the burning core of human fury that had been refined and concentrated into something approaching the divine. Vexahara's last coherent thought before her consciousness shattered was a moment of perfect understanding. She finally comprehended what humans truly were, not the weak, illogical creatures her people had assumed, but something far more dangerous. They were a species that could transform their deepest pain into their greatest weapon. The wave expanded, outward from the Defiance, moving through the Velthari fleet like wildfire through dry grass. Ships that had terrorized entire star systems simply ceased to function, their crews either dead or driven into catatonic states by the psychic backlash. The few vessels that survived the initial pulse found their weapon systems failing, their navigation computers displaying impossible readings, their very hulls beginning to resonate with a frequency that spoke of human suffering transmuted into vengeance. But the wave didn't stop with the immediate fleet. Lieutenant Corvin, somehow still alive aboard the dying Defiance, watched in awe as her sensors tracked the expanding sphere of effect. The wave was moving through hyperspace itself, following the quantum wake signatures of every Velthari ship that had ever visited this system. It was hunting them. "My God," she whispered, watching as the tactical display updated with reports from across human space. The wave was reaching Velthari forces light years away, moving through their quantum communication networks like a virus, spreading the concentrated essence of human rage across their entire civilization, the evacuation transports still fleeing. The system received garbled transmissions from the outer colonies. Velthari occupation forces that had been conducting their methodical extermination campaigns were suddenly falling silent. Their bioships were being found drifting in space, their crews either dead or huddled in their deepest chambers, refusing to emerge. Dr. Yuki Nakamura, aboard the transport New Hope, studied the readings with trembling hands. As one of the few surviving xenobiologists, she understood the implications better than most. "It's not just affecting their technology," she reported to Captain Ren Daedalus. "It's attacking their neural architecture directly. Human consciousness operates on quantum frequencies that their brains can't filter out. They're being forced to experience pure human emotion, and their psychology can't handle it." The wave continued to spread, carried by the Velthari's own quantum networks, their highly advanced communication systems designed to link their empire across vast distances had become the delivery mechanism for humanity's last desperate strike. Every major fleet, every occupation force, every research station conducting experiments on human subjects, all of them fell silent within hours. But as the reports continued to stream in, a pattern began to emerge. The wave wasn't just destructive, it was selective. Velthari forces that had shown mercy, that had attempted to minimize civilian casualties, were largely unaffected. The wave seemed to target those who had participated directly in the torture and experimentation, as if it could somehow distinguish between soldiers and sadists. It's learning, Nakamura realized with a chill. The wave is actually learning, adapting, becoming more precise as it spreads. It's not just human rage, it's human judgment. Across the galaxy, the Velthari Empire that had seemed unstoppable just days ago began to collapse. Their military hierarchy, built around the concept of perfect conquest, couldn't comprehend an enemy that attacked the very concept of consciousness. Fleets that had obliterated star systems found themselves unable to function. Their crews, either dead or driven mad by visions of their victims' final moments. The wave reached the Velthari homeworld 72 hours after the Prometheus detonation. When it struck their capital city, it didn't destroy the crystal spires or the living architecture. Instead, it did something far more profound. It made the entire population experience empathy for the first time in their species' existence. 4. A race that had evolved beyond the need for emotional connection, that had treated other sapient beings as objects of study, the sudden flood of genuine feeling was devastating. They felt every death they had caused, every moment of terror they had inflicted, every dream they had ended, and in that moment of perfect understanding, the Velthari Empire fell. In the aftermath, the galaxy held its breath. The Velthari Empire, which had spanned 3 spiral arms and commanded the loyalty of a dozen subject species, simply stopped. Their vast fleets drifted silent in space, their crews either dead or transformed into something unrecognizable. Their homeworld, once a gleaming testament to technological supremacy, had become a place of mourning where the survivors wandered through crystal cities, weeping for crimes they were only now beginning to understand. Captain Daedalus stood on the observation deck of the New Hope, watching as their small convoy of refugee ships approached what had once been the Velthari stronghold of Keth Moran. Intelligence reports suggested the system was completely dead, another victim of the wave that humanity had unleashed in its final moments. But as they dropped out of hyperspace, they found something unexpected. The Velthari ships were still there, arranged in perfect formation around the system's primary star. But they weren't moving, weren't responding to hails, weren't doing anything at all. They simply hung in space like monuments to their own defeat. Life signs? Daedalus asked his sensor operator. Present, but strange, sir. The biosignatures are all wrong. It's like they're alive but not functioning. Dr. Nakamura had spent the journey analyzing the wave's effects, trying to understand what humanity had actually accomplished. Her research painted a terrifying picture. Captain, I don't think they're dead. I think they're experiencing something their species was never designed to handle, which is conscience. The first contact came 3 days later, not from the Velthari themselves, but from one of their former subject species. The Mirhai, a race of aquatic beings who had served as the Empire's biological engineers, sent a hesitant transmission from their homeworld. Ambassador Taylor Sen, one of the few surviving human diplomats, took the call aboard the New Hope. The Mirhai delegate, Kelu Andros, appeared on screen as a graceful creature of translucent flesh and bioluminescent organs. Their species communicated through complex patterns of light, which the translation systems rendered as musical tones. Honored humans, the message began. the tones carrying notes of fear and wonder. We felt the wave. We all felt it. Every species in this sector of the galaxy experienced your pain, your rage, but also your love, your determination to protect. We have never encountered anything like it. Sen leaned forward. What happened to the Velthari? They are changed. Those who survive can no longer bear to cause suffering. They see through your eyes now, feel with your hearts. Their empire has collapsed not through destruction, but through awakening. They understand for the first time what they have done. The revelation sent shockwaves through the human survivor fleet. Over the following weeks, reports trickled in from across the galaxy. Species that had been enslaved for millennia were finding their Velthari overlords suddenly unwilling or unable to enforce their rule. The great war machines had fallen silent, not because they were broken, but because those who operated them could no longer bring themselves to cause harm. But with the collapse of the Velthari Empire came chaos. Trade routes that had been maintained for centuries broke down. Planetary governments that had existed under Velthari authority found themselves suddenly free but unprepared for independence. Some worlds descended into civil war, while others struggled with the basic logistics of survival without their former masters' technology. More disturbing were the reports of what the wave had done to other species. While most had experienced it as a brief, intense moment of emotional connection with humanity, some had been permanently changed. The hyper-empathic Zephyrians found themselves unable to function in large groups, overwhelmed by the emotional resonance they now shared with other sapient beings. The logic-based construct unity had fractured as its member minds began experiencing irrational feelings for the first time in their species' history. "We've broken the galaxy," Dr. Nakamura reported to the assembled human leadership. "The wave didn't just target the Velthari, it's fundamentally altered the psychic landscape of dozens of species. We wanted revenge and we got it. But the cost." Admiral Juno Vance, the highest-ranking surviving military officer, studied the reports with grim determination. She had lost her entire family to the Velthari's experiments, had watched her homeworld burn from orbit. But even she seemed shaken by the scope of what they had unleashed. "The question is," she said quietly, "what do we do now?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Among the surviving humans were a handful of individuals who had been touched by the wave's creation, technicians who had worked on the Prometheus device, psychics who had been in range when it detonated, medical personnel who had treated its effects. They reported strange dreams, visions of possible futures, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. "It's not finished," reported Dr. Marcus Webb, the New Hope's chief medical officer. He had been studying the long-term effects of the wave on both humans and other species. "The wave wasn't just an attack, it was a transformation. It's still spreading, still evolving, and it's carrying something with it." "What kind of something?" "Hope," Webb said simply. "Human hope. The same emotional intensity that created our rage has created something else. A vision of what the galaxy could become if species could truly understand each other. The wave is teaching empathy, yes, but it's also teaching the possibility of peace. In the depths of space, aboard dead Velthari ships, the survivors of that once proud species began to dream. They dreamed of worlds they had destroyed, of species they had enslaved, of the pain they had caused. But they also dreamed of redemption, of making amends, of using their vast technology and knowledge to heal instead of harm. And across the galaxy, other species began to dream the same dreams. 6 months after the Prometheus wave, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. The former Velthari, as they now called themselves, had emerged from their catatonic state with a burning need to atone. Their vast fleets, once instruments of conquest, had been converted into mobile hospitals and reconstruction, platforms Led by those few among them who had retained their sanity while gaining empathy, they traveled from world to world, offering to repair the damage they had inflicted. It was not an easy process. Many species, remembering millennia of oppression, attacked Velthari ships on sight. Others demanded impossible reparations, seeking to enslave their former masters in return. But gradually, tentatively, dialogue began. Aboard the human vessel Resilience, hastily constructed from salvaged Velthari technology and human ingenuity, Ambassador Sen found herself at the center of negotiations that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. The ship itself was a symbol of the new era. Human crew working alongside Velthari engineers, their crystalline forms now dimmed with what could only be described as shame, but their vast technical knowledge applied to healing rather than harm. The Catherian Collective has agreed to the Accords, reported Commander Lux Meridian, Sen's aide, and one of the new generation of humans who seem to navigate the post-wave galaxy with intuitive understanding. They'll accept Velthari assistance in rebuilding their agricultural worlds, but under strict oversight. Sen nodded, studying the holographic display that showed the slowly growing network of alliances and agreements. The wave hadn't just changed individual species. It had made interspecies cooperation possible in ways that had never existed before. Where once there had been conquest and domination, empathy now created bridges of understanding. But the greatest change was in humanity itself. The survivors, scattered across 100 refugee ships, had discovered that the wave had left them, with more than just the satisfaction of revenge. They found themselves able to sense the emotional states of other species, to understand their needs and motivations in ways that transcended language. It wasn't telepathy, it was something deeper, a fundamental shift in how human consciousness related to the galaxy around it. Dr. Kira Voss, daughter of the commander who had triggered the Prometheus device, stood before the Joint Species Council, aboard the neutral station of Haven's Rest. At barely 25, she had become one of the most influential voices in the new galactic order. Her unique combination of human determination and newfound empathy making her a natural mediator. The reconstruction efforts are showing remarkable progress, she reported to the assembled delegates. The Velthari bioships have successfully restored atmospheric processing on 47 worlds. The Mirhai have shared their genetic restoration techniques with former slave species. The Zephyrian mind healers are helping communities traumatized by centuries of oppression. She paused, looking at the diverse assembly. Crystalline Velthari sat beside aquatic Mirhai, while gaseous Etherians communicated through controlled atmospheric disturbances. Species that had been enemies for millennia now worked together on common projects. But we're not just rebuilding what was, Voss continued. We're creating something new. The wave my father unleashed didn't just destroy the old order, it showed us what becomes possible when beings truly understand each other. The evidence was everywhere. Trade agreements based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Research, collaborations that combined the strengths of dozens of species. Art and culture flowing freely between worlds that had been isolated for centuries. The galaxy was healing, and in healing, it was becoming something greater than it had ever been. Yet challenges remained. The wave had been indiscriminate in some ways, affecting species that had been innocent bystanders in the Velthari's campaigns. The Null Collective, a machine intelligence that had existed in peaceful isolation, found their purely logical existence disrupted by sudden bursts of emotion. Several worlds had fallen into chaos as their social structures, built around ancient hatreds and hierarchies, collapsed under the weight of newfound empathy, and then there were the humans themselves. We're changing, Dr. Webb reported to the Human Council aboard the New Dawn. The wave didn't just affect other species, it's continuing to transform us. The children born since the detonation are showing capabilities we don't fully understand. Enhanced empathy, yes, but also what can only be described as precognitive abilities regarding emotional states. 8-year-old Luna Kane, descendant of the Prometheus device's original creator, sat in the ship's observation lounge, drawing pictures that seemed to show possible futures. Her artwork depicted scenes of cooperation and understanding, but also darker visions of what might happen if the new order failed. In her childish scrawl, she had written words that chilled the adults who read them. The angry fire isn't gone. It's sleeping. The truth was that humanity's rage hadn't been extinguished by the wave. It had been transformed. Where once it had been destructive, it now served as a guardian force, a psychic barrier that protected the growing peace. When negotiations broke down, when old hatreds threatened to resurface, sensitive individuals across the galaxy reported feeling an echo of that original fury, a reminder of what could happen if the new understanding was abandoned. This became clear during the hegemony crisis, when a coalition of species led by the militaristic Drakmor attempted to restore the old order of conquest and domination. Their fleets assembled in the outer spiral, preparing to sweep across the reconstruction zones and establish a new empire built on familiar principles of strength and subjugation. They never got the chance. As their armadas moved toward the first target worlds, every psychically sensitive being in the galaxy felt it, a stirring of the sleeping fire. The wave hadn't been a one-time event. It had left a permanent imprint on the galaxy itself, a network of consciousness that could be activated when the principles it represented were threatened. The Drakmor fleets found their crews suddenly experiencing the full weight of their intended victims' terror, not as a brief flash of emotion, but as a sustained, overwhelming experience that made violence literally impossible. Their weapons wouldn't fire. Their soldiers couldn't fight. Their commanders couldn't give orders for destruction. Within hours, the crisis was over. The Drakmor withdrew, their leaders requesting immediate audience with the human mediators to understand what had happened to them. "It's a safeguard," Dr. Voss explained to the assembly afterwards. "The wave didn't just change us, it created a kind of immune system for the galaxy, an antibody against the kind of systematic cruelty that the Velthari represented." The implications were staggering. Humanity's final act of rage had not only ended an empire, it had fundamentally altered the nature of conflict itself in their region of space. 5 years after the wave, humanity stood at the heart of a galactic renaissance. The Terran Memorial Station orbited what had once been Earth's moon, now the only remnant of humanity's lost homeworld. Built from the combined technologies of a dozen species, it served as both monument and embassy, a place where the galaxy came to remember the price of unchecked cruelty and to celebrate the peace that had grown from humanity's sacrifice. Emperor Nixulios, once Admiral Vex Hara's chief weapons designer, knelt before the memorial wall. His crystalline form had dulled to an almost matte finish, a physical manifestation of the shame that had transformed his species. Where once his kind had been beings of terrible beauty, they now appeared humble, their light dimmed by conscience. "Every day I come here," he spoke to the human guide, his voice carrying harmonics of sorrow. "Every day I read the names, and I feel their lives ending. Your wave didn't just show us what we had done, it made us experience it. Forever." Zara Nightwind, the memorial's curator and one of the wave-changed humans, nodded with understanding. At 30, she bore the marks of her generation, eyes that seemed to hold depths of starlight, a presence that calmed even the most traumatized beings. "The memorial isn't just for the dead," she said gently. "It's for the living who must carry the weight of what was done. Your people's suffering now is real, but it serves a purpose. It ensures this never happens again." The truth was that the former Velthari had become the galaxy's most ardent peacekeepers. Their intimate knowledge of their former empire's methods, combined with their newfound empathy, made them uniquely qualified to identify and prevent the kind of systematic oppression that had once defined them. They served as early warning systems, their enhanced sensitivity to suffering allowing them to detect brewing conflicts before they could escalate. In the station's central chamber, delegates from hundreds of species gathered for the 5th Annual Reconstruction Assembly. The agenda was ambitious. The final phase of rebuilding the devastated sectors, the establishment of new trade routes through former Velthari space, and the delicate matter of what to do with the Empire's abandoned superweapons. President Maya, Stellar Dust, elected leader of the human survivors and architect of the new galactic order, addressed the assembly from a podium built from crystallized Velthari biometal and human steel. Her very name had become a symbol of humanity's transformation from a dying species to the galaxy's conscience. "We gather not as conquerors or the conquered," she began, her words carrying across space through quantum translators that rendered her meaning perfectly in hundreds of languages. "We gather as fellow travelers who have learned that our greatest strength lies not in what we can destroy, but in what we can create together." The assembly had become more than a diplomatic gathering. It was a celebration of diversity united by understanding. Art installations from 1,000 worlds decorated the halls. Music that blended the harmonic mathematics of machine intelligences with the emotional compositions of organic species filled the air. Children of dozens of species played together in gravity-adjusted playgrounds, their laughter a sound that had once seemed impossible in the Velthari's rigid empire. But beneath the celebration, there was always the awareness of what made it possible. The wave continued to pulse through the galaxy's psychic substrate, a constant reminder and guardian. Those sensitive to its presence described it as feeling like standing near a banked fire, warm and comforting, but carrying the implicit promise of terrible heat if provoked. Dr. Cosmos Chen, humanity's foremost expert on the wave's long-term effects, presented his latest findings to a mixed crowd of scientists and philosophers. "We're seeing evolution in real time," he explained, his presentation showing brain scans from multiple species. "The wave didn't just change behavior, it's changing neurological structures. Species are developing new capacity for empathy, for understanding emotional states outside their own experience. The changes went beyond the merely psychological. Children born in the post-wave era showed remarkable abilities to communicate across species barriers, often understanding meaning and intent without translation. Some could sense emotional distress across vast distances, serving as early warning systems for brewing conflicts. Others seemed to instinctively know how to help traumatized beings heal. Most remarkably, they showed an innate understanding of what Dr. Chen termed ethical resonance, the ability to sense when actions would cause harm and to feel compelled to prevent it. It was as if the wave had written a new moral code into the very fabric of consciousness. Luna Caney, now 13 and something of a celebrity among the post-wave generation, demonstrated this during her presentation to the youth assembly. Without speaking, she somehow conveyed to a room full of young beings from different species the full emotional weight of a historical atrocity, then showed them how understanding that pain could be transformed into determination to protect others. "The fire that burned in the first humans is still burning," she said, her young voice carrying an authority that silenced rooms full of adults. "But it burns differently now. It doesn't consume, it illuminates. It shows us the way forward." The truth of her words was evident everywhere. The galaxy's crime rates had plummeted as beings found themselves unable to cause suffering without experiencing it themselves. Wars between species had become literally impossible as armies discovered. They could feel their enemies' fear and pain. Even accidents and natural disasters were met with unprecedented cooperation as beings across vast distances felt compelled to help. But perhaps the most profound change was in humanity itself. No longer the desperate, dying species that had triggered the wave. They had become something unprecedented, a people whose greatest trauma had been transformed into their greatest gift. They served as mediators, healers, and guardians, their unique ability to understand both rage and compassion, making them ideal shepherds of the new age. Standing before the memorial wall as the assembly concluded, President Stellardust read the final entry, the name of Commander Kalen Voss, the man whose sacrifice had made everything possible. The inscription beneath his name, written in every major galactic language, captured the essence of what humanity had achieved. He burned with righteous fury so that the galaxy might burn with hope. As the delegation dispersed, returning to their homeworlds to implement the Assembly's decisions, the wave pulsed once more through the galaxy's consciousness. But this time, it carried not rage or pain, but something else entirely. The feeling of a promise kept, of a future secured through the transformation of humanity's darkest moment into its greatest gift. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, as if acknowledging that in the vast darkness of space, one species' refusal to die quietly had lit a fire that would burn forever, protecting the innocent and ensuring that never again would the galaxy know the kind of systematic cruelty that had once threatened to consume it all. Human rage had indeed burned brighter than suns, and in burning had made the stars themselves safe for all who dwelled among them.